The moment your wife starts performing your humiliation for other people's entertainment, the marriage already has an audience. That sentence kept replaying in my head while I stood under the gold lights of the rooftop terrace, holding a glass of bourbon that suddenly tasted bitter. My name is Ethan Walker, 42 years old, Chicago-born, former software founder. Most people at that party thought I was another rich wife's quiet husband tagging along for free champagne and polite smiles. Claire made sure of that. The rooftop belonged to Halcyon Financial Group, 37 floors above downtown Chicago, packed with executives in tailored suits and women who wore ambition like jewelry. Claire fit perfectly into that world. Emerald silk dress, diamond bracelet on her wrist, one hand wrapped around a champagne flute, while Ryan Mercer leaned close enough to make every husband in the room notice. Ryan carried himself like every corporate predator I'd ever funded and later replaced. Sharp haircut, white teeth, expensive watch. The kind of guy who memorized power phrases from leadership podcasts and mistook arrogance for intelligence. I watched him laugh beside my wife while a few junior associates circled them like satellites. Then Claire spotted me near the bar. Her smile shifted instantly. Smaller. Controlled. The smile people use when they suddenly remember an inconvenience exists. "There he is," she announced, loud enough for the nearby tables to turn. My mysterious husband finally left the house. A few people laughed politely. I gave a small nod and walked toward them. Ryan extended his hand with the confidence of a man who thought every room already belonged to him. "Claire says you retired early," he said. "Must be nice." Claire took a sip of champagne before adding the line that changed everything. "Retired from ambition, maybe." More laughter. Stronger this time. Claire enjoyed it. That part cut the deepest. Her eyes scanned the group after the joke landed, measuring approval like quarterly numbers. "Ethan's mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing," she continued. "Honestly, I should teach seminars on supporting grown men financially." Another wave of laughter rolled across the rooftop. Ryan smirked beside her and rested his hand lightly against the small of her back like it already belonged there. Claire left it there. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Years ago, I built a cybersecurity company from a 2-bedroom apartment with folding tables and burned coffee. Sold it at 36. Quietly moved most of the money into long-term holdings, private trusts, and strategic equity positions. I stopped chasing headlines because I already understood something people like Ryan never learn. Real power rarely introduces itself. Claire used to understand that too. Back when we ate takeout on unpacked moving boxes and celebrated our first profitable quarter with grocery store wine. Somewhere between her promotion to senior operations director and the endless corporate dinners, she started confusing visibility with value. I looked around the rooftop and noticed details most husbands would miss. Ryan wore the same platinum cufflinks Claire bought for a client gift 3 months earlier. Claire's phone sat face down beside her plate every time it buzzed. Ryan answered her unfinished sentences before she finished speaking. Patterns tell the truth long before people do. Ryan raised his glass toward me. "So what exactly do you do all day, Ethan?" he asked. Claire laughed before I answered. "He manages stress by avoiding responsibility." The group exploded again. This time I smiled. Calm. Controlled. Claire noticed immediately. Her laughter faded for half a second. Because after 12 years together, my wife understood one thing better than anyone in that room. The moment I went quiet, I started paying attention. Then Ryan's phone lit up beside his drink. Just 1 second. Barely enough time for anyone else to notice. But I saw the preview message flash across the screen before he grabbed it. It read, "Delete our hotel receipts before Ethan sees the statements." I spent 12 years building systems designed to catch human error, fraud detection, behavioral anomalies, digital risk patterns. People always assume betrayal arrives wrapped in lipstick stains or dramatic confessions. Real betrayal hides inside repetition, tiny shifts, timing patterns, behavioral drift. Ryan grabbed his phone too fast that night. Claire saw it too. Her shoulders tightened for half a second before she lifted her champagne glass again and forced another smile into the room. Most husbands would have confronted her right there. Anger makes men predictable. Predictable men lose leverage. I drove home beside Claire in silence while she scrolled through her phone with the brightness turned low against her thigh. Every few minutes her screen flashed across her face. Tiny reactions. Tight lips. Fast blinking. Calculating. She knew I saw something. She just did not know how much. The moment we stepped into the penthouse, she kicked off her heels and moved straight toward the kitchen island where she always dropped her purse after events. Then she paused. Small detail. Her hand stayed on the purse strap longer than usual before she carried it upstairs instead. That single adjustment told me more than a confession ever could. Guilty people protect devices before relationships. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and opened my laptop at the dining table. Claire spent years mocking my obsession with data architecture. Tonight that obsession became useful. I logged into our shared financial dashboard first. 3 credit cards, 2 joint accounts, 1 investment reserve account tied to household expenses. I exported 90 days of transactions into a spreadsheet and started sorting merchant categories by frequency, geography, and timestamp clusters. 43 minutes later, 1 pattern surfaced immediately. Repeated charges linked to the same boutique hotel in River North. Thursday evenings. Roughly every 2 weeks. Always between $600 and $800. Valet. Room service. Premium bar charges. The reservation sat under a consulting vendor profile connected to Halcyon Financial. Sloppy. Either Ryan reimbursed the expenses through company channels or Claire helped him bury them inside executive entertainment reports. Both options interested me. I opened another tab and pulled archived metadata from Claire's shared calendar sync. Most people delete messages. Few people clean. Synchronization logs. Calendar modifications leave residue across cloud backups, device handoffs, and notification timestamps. Claire erased 6 dinner appointments during the last 4 months. Every deletion lined up perfectly with the hotel charges. Same nights. Same time windows. My chest tightened once. Then something colder took over. Precision. Focus. I stopped thinking like a husband around midnight. I started thinking like an investigator. Upstairs, Claire moved through the bedroom while her phone vibrated twice against the marble nightstand. She locked the bathroom door before answering. Another pattern. Claire loved open spaces. Open doors. Open noise. Privacy suddenly became important to her. I enlarged the financial records again and found something else buried deeper inside the reimbursement chains. Ryan submitted 3 accelerated vendor approvals during the same quarter. All 3 involved cybersecurity infrastructure contracts. My old industry. My old contacts. One vendor stood out immediately. Blackridge Digital Solutions. I leaned back slowly in my chair because I knew that company very well. I owned 12% of it through a silent equity trust nobody at Halcyon knew existed. Ryan had unknowingly routed internal contracts through a company partially controlled by me. My phone buzzed across the table. Unknown number. Chicago area code. I answered without speaking. A male voice lowered itself almost to a whisper. Mr. Walker, my name is Daniel Brooks. We have never met directly, but I believe your wife and Ryan Mercer created a very serious liability problem for my company. The voice on the phone stayed calm, almost rehearsed, like a man used to delivering problems without emotional residue. Mr. Walker, we need to talk about a structural exposure inside Halcyon Financial Group's vendor pipeline. I stayed silent and let him continue because interruption wastes information. Daniel Brooks exhaled once before he laid it out in clean corporate language. Ryan Mercer had been pushing cybersecurity procurement through 3 layered vendors, each one adding a margin buffer that obscured final ownership. Claire signed off on internal compliance. Summaries that bypassed secondary audit review. The system did what systems always do when people assume trust replaces verification. It accepted the input. It never questioned intent. I opened a deeper ledger I had not accessed in years, a private compliance model I built during my exit from the tech company. That model still tracked equity exposure across shell vendors, subcontractor chains, and deferred reporting loops. Within minutes, I traced the anomaly Daniel hinted at. Ryan did not just manipulate reimbursements. He redirected procurement approvals into Blackridge Digital Solutions, a firm sitting inside a nested ownership structure tied to offshore holding accounts in Delaware and the Cayman Administrative Corridor. Most executives never follow that trail. They trust quarterly summaries instead of transaction-level validation. I followed it because I designed half the validation architecture they now relied on. Claire's name appeared deeper in the chain than expected, not as an operator, but as an approver on 3 expedited releases tied to Ryan's consulting contract. Each approval carried timestamps that matched her calendar deletions. She had learned how to erase visibility without removing impact. That skill alone told me she had moved past emotional decisions into strategic concealment. Daniel's voice tightened slightly. If this surfaces through standard audit channels, Ryan collapses first. Claire follows within days. But there is a third layer you should see before anything moves forward. He sent a secure packet. I opened it and scanned the file index. Internal equity transfer logs. Executive discretionary adjustments. One entry froze my attention. A dormant trust account, activated 3 months earlier, listed under my original company holding structure, reactivated through a signature protocol I recognized immediately. Claire had initiated a spousal access claim under an outdated marital asset clause connected to my presale equity pool. She did it through Ryan's legal advisor, bypassing my notification threshold by exploiting a legacy clause I had overlooked during restructuring. That single move changed the entire geometry of the situation. It meant Claire no longer saw me as a partner or even an obstacle. She saw me as a dormant asset pool waiting for extraction. Daniel paused on the call before adding one more detail. There is something else. Ryan scheduled a private liquidity event tied to your old equity trust. It executes in 48 hours unless a counter-signature interrupts the authorization chain. I closed the laptop halfway and felt the shift in pressure inside the room. This stopped being about betrayal. It evolved into timing. Whoever controlled the signature window controlled the entire outcome. Upstairs, Claire's phone vibrated again in short, controlled bursts, the kind of pattern used when messages carry urgency without context. I checked the system logs one more time and noticed something new had appeared inside the trust ledger. A pending co-executive access request under Claire Walker's legal identity, stamped with a verification route that passed through Ryan's advisory firm. She had escalated without telling me. The system now awaited a response. One approval would grant her partial liquidation rights over assets she never built. I placed my hand on the keyboard and paused as a second notification appeared from Daniel's channel. They are moving faster than expected. If she activates that request first, your control layer gets diluted before we can freeze anything. The cursor blinked over the authorization field as the countdown window quietly initialized at the top of the screen, marking the beginning of a decision that would determine who controlled everything I built. The authorization window tightened faster than expected. 48 hours collapsed into a sequence of precise triggers, each one tied to financial execution rules I had written years ago for scenarios exactly like this. Claire initiated the co-executive request again, this time routing it through a secondary verification node tied to Ryan Mercer's advisory firm. That detail mattered more than the request itself. It proved coordination, not coincidence. Daniel Brooks stayed on the line while I rebuilt the transaction path in real time. He fed me timestamps from Halcyon's internal compliance server. Every approval Claire signed matched a procurement acceleration cycle that Ryan had engineered to unlock liquidity from dormant project reserves. In plain terms, they were converting corporate operational trust into liquid personal leverage. I pulled up the original smart contract architecture I designed during my exit from the tech industry. The system used layered authorization tiers, each one requiring sequential confirmation from both fiduciary and operational controllers. Claire learned how to bypass perception layers, but she never touched the structural root. Ryan relied on speed. I relied on architecture. That difference always decides outcomes in systems like this. I initiated a passive trace on Ryan's Blackridge Digital Solutions routing table. The system revealed something he never expected to be visible. A mirrored compliance feed existed inside the trust structure I still controlled. Every attempt they made to adjust liquidity triggered a silent log entry inside my legacy dashboard. Claire's next request arrived 12 minutes later. She escalated access level to full liquidation authorization under marital asset reclassification. That move confirmed what Daniel warned earlier. She believed legal framing alone could override structural ownership. I opened the legal override matrix tied to my trust. 3 signatures could unlock it. One belonged to me. The second remained dormant under a legacy board member account I controlled. The third required external arbitration. Ryan attempted to force that arbitration path through a fabricated urgency claim tied to vendor insolvency risk. Clever, but transparent under audit conditions. I started cross-referencing Claire's communication metadata. Her device synced with Ryan's server cluster at exact intervals matching each financial escalation. She stopped acting independently 3 weeks earlier. From that point forward, every decision passed through his operational guidance layer. Daniel finally broke his silence. If they trigger full liquidation before you respond, the trust shifts into temporary shared custody, pending legal review. That puts Ryan inside your financial perimeter. I paused on the authorization screen and shifted focus to a deeper asset layer. Beneath the trust sat a dormant acquisition clause tied to Blackridge Digital Solutions. The clause activated only if Blackridge participated in fraudulent cross-vendor coordination involving a controlling beneficiary. Ryan had already satisfied that condition without realizing it. Claire's next message arrived directly through the secure channel Daniel set up. One line. No greeting. No context. I need you to approve the transfer today. Ryan says delays will expose everything. The message structure told me everything I needed. She no longer evaluated outcomes. She repeated instructions. I opened the compliance trigger panel and ran a final integrity sweep across the entire chain. The system flagged 3 violations simultaneously: unauthorized procurement bundling, fiduciary misrepresentation, and synchronized asset manipulation between executive partners. At that moment, Daniel's voice shifted. Ethan, there is something else. Blackridge just submitted a counter-filing. They are attempting to freeze your legacy trust before your signature window closes. My cursor hovered over the authorization field as the system initiated a forced countdown reduction. 10 minutes remained. One decision now determined whether Claire and Ryan controlled the asset flow or whether the architecture I built years ago finally turned against the people trying to exploit it. Then a second alert appeared, carrying an identifier that should never have been active. Internal trust override request initiated from Claire Walker using emergency beneficiary escalation protocol. The emergency override request from Claire Walker hit the system with a priority flag that bypassed standard review queues. She escalated into the only access tier that could interrupt a trust architecture mid-cycle. That move carried legal weight, not emotional weight. I recognized the structure immediately because I had designed that escalation path years ago as a safety valve for uncontested marital dissolution cases involving shared equity exposure. Claire never understood she was walking inside a system that recorded intent before action. I opened the override packet and read her submitted justification line by line. She cited financial instability risk, vendor dependency exposure, and urgent preservation of marital assets. Each phrase mirrored legal templates Ryan Mercer's advisory firm used in prior filings. That alone confirmed authorship influence. Daniel Brooks returned on the secure channel without waiting for my prompt. His voice carried a tighter edge now. She activated emergency beneficiary status. If the system validates it, she gains temporary authority over liquidation control until arbitration completes. I shifted focus to the verification layer. The system required 3 validation points for emergency approval: independent witness verification, cross-institutional audit confirmation, and legacy trustee override. Ryan attempted to simulate the first 2 through Blackridge's network, feeding synthetic compliance confirmations into the audit pipeline. The system flagged inconsistencies within seconds. Timestamp drift, signature entropy mismatch, vendor authentication loops repeating in non-random patterns. Every manipulation left fingerprints in the validation graph. Claire's request still sat in pending status, waiting for final evaluation. I accessed the behavioral log tied to her account. Her login pattern changed 3 weeks ago. Previously, she initiated access between morning and mid-afternoon. Now she operated late evening, always within minutes of Ryan's activity spikes. Correlation coefficient reached 93%. At that level, independent decision-making dissolves into structured influence. Daniel interrupted again. If she succeeds here, she bypasses your liquidation veto entirely. Ryan gets operational control through her proxy status. I leaned back and opened the trust's forensic ledger. The system mapped every financial action back to intent clusters derived from authorization history. One cluster stood out. Claire's early participation in minor approval edits had established her as a trusted secondary operator inside the system's machine learning profile. Ryan exploited that trust classification to elevate her access without triggering alarm thresholds. Clever exploitation of behavioral trust decay curves. I initiated a reverse audit sequence targeting Blackridge's counterfiling. The system unfolded their strategy in layers. First layer, freeze my trust using emergency beneficiary escalation. Second layer, force arbitration delay. Third layer, extract liquidity during the freeze window through parallel vendor routing. Every step depended on Claire maintaining active escalation pressure. She became the lever, not the decision maker. Daniel spoke again, slower this time. We have less than 5 minutes before the system auto-validates her request based on incomplete counter data. I moved the cursor across the override interface and ran a silent integrity merge between my legacy trustee key and the dormant board authorization key. The system hesitated. For the first time, the architecture entered conflict with itself. Claire's request pulsed again, now upgraded to priority review after partial validation from Blackridge's counterfeit audit feed. Ryan had managed to inject just enough synthetic confirmation to push the system toward automated acceptance. Then a new file arrived in the secure channel from Daniel. One attachment. No message. I opened it. Inside sat a live forensic trace extracted from Claire's device. Not messages. Not emails. Behavioral audio logs. Short fragments of conversations captured during financial review sessions. Ryan's voice dominated most entries. Instructions. Corrections. Timing cues. Claire responded with compliance markers more than opinions. The system parsed it instantly as directional control evidence. I exhaled once and moved the cursor to the final authorization barrier. The system displayed a warning. Emergency override request now intersecting with trust counterfiling from controlling beneficiary. Resolution required immediate selection. Approve escalation or initiate full lockout. 10 seconds remained before auto-execution. 10 seconds collapsed into a single decision point where systems reveal their true hierarchy. I studied the override screen while Daniel Brooks stayed silent for the first time since the escalation began. Silence from him meant calculation reached its final stage. Claire's emergency beneficiary request pulsed again, now backed by partial validation from Blackridge's forged compliance layer. Ryan had succeeded in shaping perception inside the system just long enough to force resolution pressure. The architecture responded exactly as designed under stress conditions. It stopped waiting for truth and started prioritizing timing. That is where most people lose control of complex systems. I moved my focus away from the surface interface and dropped into the underlying trustee execution layer. The system I built years ago did not operate on emotion or persuasion. It executed hierarchy through cryptographic authority chains. Claire held procedural access, but procedural access never outranked structural ownership. I initiated the dormant override key stored in the legacy board vault. The key required manual activation through a secondary identity validation protocol that bypassed all emergency escalation routes. Most executives never even knew it existed. Ryan never considered it because he believed speed outran architecture. He miscalculated. The system paused at 7 seconds. Claire's request attempted final validation again, feeding through Ryan's counterfeit audit stream. The logs flickered as the system attempted to reconcile contradictory ownership signals. I watched the conflict propagate through 3 validation layers. First layer flagged authentication drift. Second layer detected cross-account influence. Third layer triggered full forensic comparison against historical trust origin data. That final layer carried absolute weight. It compared intent at the moment of trust creation. The result collapsed Ryan's entire escalation strategy in real time. Daniel finally spoke again, voice controlled but sharper. They just lost integrity validation across all emergency channels. I did not respond. I executed the override. The system accepted my legacy trustee signature instantly, collapsing Claire's emergency status into inactive review mode. The liquidity window froze mid-cycle. Every pending transfer locked into read-only audit state. Ryan's counter-filing attempted one last push through Blackridge's feed, but the system rejected it before propagation completed. The architecture no longer negotiated. It enforced structure. Claire's escalation trail shifted color on the interface, moving from active priority to containment status. That change told me everything. She had crossed from decision maker into subject of review. Daniel exhaled slowly through the line. It is over on their side. They just do not know it yet. I opened the forensic ledger again and traced the final movement inside Ryan's network. His system attempted a last extraction maneuver through a shadow vendor account, redirecting funds through a dormant consulting shell registered under offshore compliance masking. The attempt triggered an internal audit cascade I had embedded years ago specifically for hostile liquidity behavior. The cascade activated without delay. Ryan's access threads collapsed one by one as the system sealed every exit route. Then something unexpected surfaced inside the audit feed. Claire initiated a direct message through the legal escalation channel, bypassing Ryan's interface entirely. The message contained only one line, marked urgent under marital arbitration protocol. Why did everything just freeze? The question appeared on screen at the exact moment Daniel said, "Ethan, there is another development. Ryan just attempted to transfer control of Blackridge assets under your name." That statement changed the entire field again. Because that transfer signature required access to a credential only one person outside of me had ever seen. The message about Blackridge attempting to transfer control under my name hit the system like a controlled detonation. Ryan had escalated beyond manipulation into identity projection. He tried to weaponize attribution itself, pushing my credentials into a transfer chain that would make it appear I authorized asset movement against my own trust structure. That move revealed his misunderstanding of the system at a deeper level. He believed names controlled ownership. I knew ownership controlled names. Daniel Brooks returned immediately, voice sharper than before. He is trying to reverse map your trustee identity into Blackridge's liability grid. If that signature propagates, every asset tied to your legacy company gets flagged under contested ownership. I opened the forensic trace attached to the transfer attempt. Ryan's request did not originate from Claire's device anymore. It came through a mirrored authentication tunnel built from her prior approvals. That meant he extracted her behavioral signature pattern and cloned it into an independent execution thread. Claire's account became the mask. Ryan became the operator. I initiated a deep credential audit across my dormant identity layers. The system exposed something Ryan never anticipated. My original founder signature, the one tied to my early cybersecurity firm, still held master authority over 3 subsidiary verification nodes inside Blackridge's compliance backbone. I did not need to fight his transfer attempt. I only needed to reclaim structural priority. Claire's message arrived again through the legal escalation channel. Short. Fragmented. Ryan says this is your fault. He says you are blocking everything on purpose. The emotional framing confirmed full psychological capture. She no longer interpreted events. She transmitted conclusions supplied by someone else. Daniel cut in before I responded. He is turning her into the narrative shield. If she escalates further, she becomes the legal face of the breach. I accessed the liability projection matrix and mapped the consequence chain. Claire stood at the center of a collapsing structure she believed she controlled. Every escalation she initiated strengthened Ryan's exposure while increasing her personal liability footprint. That contradiction would surface soon in formal audit review. I activated the counter layer I had embedded years earlier inside my trust architecture, a silent compliance override designed for hostile proxy manipulation scenarios. The system accepted the trigger without delay. Across the interface, Ryan's transfer attempt stalled mid-route. Blackridge's asset grid lit up with red containment flags as internal reconciliation protocols engaged. Funds, permissions, and signature rights froze across all dependent nodes. Daniel exhaled slowly. Containment is active. He just lost movement. Across the entire vendor lattice, I watched the system trace Ryan's final maneuver. He attempted to reroute authority through Claire's emergency beneficiary status again, but the override layer intercepted it instantly and redirected validation back into the trust origin point. The system now required primary trustee confirmation for any movement. That meant every path led back to me. Then Claire initiated a direct call through the secure arbitration line. I accepted. Her voice carried something I had not heard before. Pressure without structure. "Ethan, they are saying you are stopping everything. Ryan says you locked the accounts." I let the silence sit for 2 seconds before responding. In systems like this, silence often reveals alignment. Behind her voice, I heard Ryan's instructions in real time, filtered through her phrasing. He coached her language, controlled her framing, shaped her urgency. I opened the live audit feed while she continued speaking, and the system flagged a new development. Ryan attempted emergency reclassification of Blackridge assets under litigation protection status, using Claire's escalation as justification. That move crossed a legal threshold I had not seen him approach before. Daniel's voice dropped. If he completes that filing, this moves from financial containment to full corporate fraud litigation. I stared at the interface as the final approval window recalculated across the system. Claire spoke again, faster now. Ethan, please just fix this. I do not understand what is happening anymore. The request carried emotional collapse layered over procedural ignorance. And then the system displayed a new alert, cutting through every active process. A federal audit inquiry had just been triggered against Blackridge Digital Solutions, initiated by an anonymous trustee submission using my legacy identity credentials. The federal audit inquiry hit Blackridge Digital Solutions before Ryan Mercer could stabilize his counter-narrative. The notification propagated across multiple regulatory channels at once, triggering synchronized review protocols in banking oversight, corporate compliance, and trust governance systems tied to my legacy identity. That kind of escalation never starts quietly. It fractures every assumption built on hidden coordination. Daniel Brooks reacted instantly. This is no longer a private containment. The federal layer just activated full forensic discovery. I tracked the audit entry as it expanded through structured disclosure pipelines. Every financial movement tied to Blackridge now required historical justification at transaction level. Ryan's earlier attempt to reclassify assets under litigation protection collapsed under the weight of retroactive verification. The system began reconstructing intent from execution data instead of accepting declared intent. That shift changed everything. Claire's name surfaced repeatedly inside the audit feed, attached to approval chains she believed were routine administrative tasks. Each signature now carried contextual analysis, timing, sequence dependency, cross-account influence probability. The system started separating her decisions from the influence patterns surrounding them. Daniel's voice tightened. Once they map her decision trail against his instruction pattern, she stops looking like a partner and starts looking like a controlled vector. I opened the live behavioral reconstruction panel. The system rebuilt Claire's involvement across the last 90 days. Her escalation points clustered tightly around Ryan's procurement cycles, never independent, always reactive. That pattern alone triggered compliance risk classification. Meanwhile, Ryan attempted one final structural pivot. He filed a retroactive ownership claim against Blackridge's cybersecurity division, attempting to anchor control through fabricated advisory history. The system rejected it within seconds, then flagged his legal entity for coordinated misrepresentation across vendor ecosystems. That flag carried weight beyond corporate review. It pushed directly into federal investigative scope. Claire called again through the secure line, but this time her voice carried instability instead of urgency. Ethan, they just contacted me. Some federal investigators. They asked about signatures I do not even remember approving. I listened carefully because that sentence confirmed something critical. She no longer understood the structure she had participated in. She only recognized fragments of it. I accessed the audit overlay and watched as investigators reconstructed the entire chain in real time. They started from Blackridge's irregular vendor flow, traced it through Ryan's advisory shell, then pulled every authorization node back to Claire's account as the visible approval layer. The system did exactly what it always does under scrutiny. It removed narrative and preserved structure. Daniel spoke slowly. They are going to interview her as a primary authorization signer. That puts her inside formal liability classification. I did not respond immediately. I reviewed the trust architecture one more time and confirmed something that changed the direction of everything. My anonymous trustee submission that triggered the federal audit had already been logged under full authentication verification. The system now treated the investigation as initiated from within my control layer. That meant every path of inquiry would eventually return to my authority node for final clarification. Claire's voice broke slightly through the line. Ryan said you did this. He said you started all of this on purpose. I paused before answering because that statement revealed the final collapse of her perception framework. She no longer evaluated truth independently. She assigned ownership of consequences based on the last person speaking to her. I opened the audit progression map and saw investigators move into Ryan's personal financial networks, offshore routing tables, private consulting contracts, secondary brokerage accounts. Every layer began producing inconsistencies under synchronized review. Daniel's tone shifted again. Ethan, there is one more development. Ryan just attempted to transfer remaining Blackridge liquidity through a personal offshore relay, but the federal freeze locked it mid-route. I looked at the screen as the system displayed the final status update. Asset control fragmented. Authorization hierarchy reset. External oversight fully engaged. Then a new alert appeared at the top of the interface, marked highest priority. Claire Walker had just requested emergency face-to-face testimony with federal investigators, listing my name as the primary reference point for all financial authorization history. The federal investigators arrived with precision, not panic. Their questions followed a timeline rebuilt from transaction logs, authorization chains, and vendor escalation trails. From my terminal, I reviewed the audit feed while Daniel Brooks stayed on a secure line, watching Blackridge's financial ecosystem unravel layer by layer. Claire Walker sat at the center of it now, not as the mastermind, but as the verified authorization node whose signature had passed through too many systems without independent validation. Ryan Mercer's strategy collapsed the moment investigators connected his advisory shell to the offshore routing structure. After that, every financial action he touched became traceable. He tried calling it consulting oversight, but the system no longer accepted stories. It accepted transaction truth. Claire entered federal review believing she could explain confusion. Instead, investigators showed her authorization maps from the last quarter, each document carrying timestamps, device fingerprints, and dependency chains leading back to Ryan's instruction patterns. I watched her confidence break in stages. First when hotel reimbursements matched deleted calendar entries, then when synchronization logs revealed redirected messages she had never noticed. By the third layer, investigators classified her as an influenced primary signer under external operational control. Daniel spoke quietly. She is exposed unless she proves independent intent. Ryan made one final move, sending an affidavit through Blackridge's residual network claiming Claire acted alone. The system flagged it as external contamination and locked him out completely. Offshore accounts froze. Contracts suspended. Vendors vanished into compliance quarantine. Then investigators requested verification of the anonymous trustee who triggered the audit. I entered the channel and confirmed my legacy credentials. Validation came instantly. Claire's message arrived minutes later through the federal liaison. They said you initiated all of this, that you had control the whole time. Her voice carried no accusation now, only recognition. Ryan's last attempt to blame her failed when investigators displayed the full behavioral reconstruction. Every instruction, every transfer, every escalation aligned into one closed loop of control. The final update appeared. Coordinated financial manipulation through proxy authorization confirmed. Ryan detained. Claire released pending review. Then one final alert surfaced. A sealed federal advisory request under Claire Walker's identity, asking to speak directly with me.